Welcome to the Veteran Spouse Network podcast, brought to you in collaboration with Coming Home Well. I'm your host, Hannah O'Brien, both a veteran spouse and the program manager for the Veteran Spouse Network. On each episode of our show, I will host different guests to learn more about the stories, unmet needs, and resources available to our military and veteran families. We're the show that's making space for your stories, so that here you know you're never alone.
Welcome back to the Veteran Spouse Network podcast. I'm very excited to welcome a former military spouse, current veteran spouse, and author to join us this month to share her story and discuss how writing can be a powerful tool for processing thoughts, emotions, and for healing. Whether it be for spouses, service members, or veterans, healing arts programs have become more and more utilized in this community and can be an incredible complement to the more traditional supports we see, such as therapy, peer support, etc. So with that, Victoria, I wanted to welcome you, and I'd love for you to kind of just introduce yourself and tell us a bit more about yourself, your family, your connection to this community, and then we'll kind of get into more of your work.
Great. Yes. So I am a veteran spouse. I'm a mom of 5 kids. I have 2 stepkids, and I have 3 biological daughters of my own. And I am a writer, poet, and a novelist. And my most recent book, called Homefront, is a short story collection, and that just came out recently. And that book is based on all of my experiences in the military community. It's fiction, but it kind of reflects the times that I've had in different ways within the military spouse community. So I spent 10 years as a spouse to a Navy fighter pilot. We lived all over. We lived in Mississippi, Florida, Virginia, DC. We had 2 children. We actually ended up getting divorced after his third deployment. And eventually I remarried a man who happened to be a former former Marine. So I'm still very much involved in the community. One thing I have done is volunteered for the Armed Services Arts Partnership, which offers creative writing and comedy classes to veterans, spouses, active duty military. And so I love kind of staying involved in that way, and just, being a part of that whole community. I feel like it's a lifelong thing.
Yes, yes, it is. Definitely, we see that
Yeah.
and people don't understand it. So not everyone understands it. So you want to stay connected where you can to be able to connect with those people who get it. So writing, I'm curious. I actually don't even think I told you this when we first talked, but my mom is also a writer. So writing is close to my
Oh, yeah, I didn't know that.
and I'm curious, knowing her kind of story a little bit, but I'm curious for yours, like what drew you towards writing in the first place? Is this something you'd always been passionate about? Was it a career shift? Like, what was your journey with that?
So I was always a writer. I loved writing. I still have little books that I wrote in elementary school, which I recently read to my 9 and 10-year-old kids, and they are like love. They just think it's so.
Uh-oh, I lost you.
So I always really loved writing.
Okay,
I
pause
took
real
a
quick.
bunch of writing classes. At the time, I thought I wanted to be a lawyer. Oh,
Oh, yeah, pause. Sorry.
oh no, did I break up?
Yeah, you broke up for a second.
It said unstable
Yeah.
connection. Okay.
Let's
Am I
try
okay now?
again. We'll pause. We'll do like a little pause because that's what tells me like
Okay.
this is where we need to edit. Um,
Okay.
and it was pretty soon after you started answering that question. So if you just want to start
I'll
over.
just start over. Okay. Okay, yeah, so I always wanted to be a writer in some capacity. I didn't know that I wanted to do it for a career, but when I was young, I wrote lots of books just for fun. And I still have a lot of them. I kept some of them and showed them to my kids just a couple months ago, and they thought it was the coolest thing because my 10-year-old loves making her own books. So that was fun. But then when I went to college, I was trying to be very practical, so I thought I would become a lawyer.
Mhm.
So I majored in English, but at the going through, I was thinking, maybe I'll do international law because I was really interested in foreign languages. And um, I got all the way through the LSATs my junior year. And after I took the LSATs, I just broke down crying and I was like, I really don't like this. This is really making me miserable. So I just gave up and I decided to apply to graduate school in writing instead. And I got a scholarship to Ireland to study writing. And then that like, things just kind of fell into place. I did that for a year, and then, I got into the Iowa Writers Workshop, which is a 2-year MFA program in Iowa City, and I believe it's the first MFA program in the country, so that was really exciting. I had an amazing time there, and so then, like, that was it. That was suddenly I was, like, doing writing. So, yeah, I kind of, just kind of fell into it a little bit, but it was something I always really liked.
Yeah, very cool. And I guess we should say too, Homefront is not your first published work. So I didn't prep you for this question, but I guess when because I again know my mom's journey, this is all like it's flexible work, but it's hard work to get to this like point of being published. So when like in your career and in your journey as a military spouse, were you like working towards publishing and publishing your first works?
Um, the whole time. There's been a lot of successes, but also a lot of failures. I mean, I wrote my first novel was my thesis in college, and I got an agent, and she sent it out to publishers, and nothing ever happened with that book. Then I went to graduate school, and during those 3 years, I was kind of thinking about what the next book would be. And I was lucky I got another agent during graduate school, which is the same one I still have today after all these years. She's wonderful. Um, and uh, and so I think going into the military life was part of what also kind of convinced me to try it as a career because when I graduated, my um, fiance at the time, we got married, I think not too long after I graduated, was like he didn't know where he was going to be. And it's hard to kind of pursue a job. And so I was like, you know what, I'm just going to try writing for a little while. And so I was working on a novel and I was getting really frustrated, just kind of hitting a lot of dead ends in that process. And so I decided to try poetry, which was not what I had gone to graduate school for. I'd gone for fiction. And so I took a poetry class. This was when we were in Virginia Beach. And I really enjoyed it. And so I felt like there was not as much pressure on myself to do
Mhm.
that. And those poems ended up actually becoming my first book, which was a poetry book called When the Men Go Off to War. I wrote most of them during my husband's first deployment. So I was on my own. We didn't have kids at that time. So that ended up being my first book. And then not about a year later, um, I had finished and published my next book, which was a novel called Mrs. Houdini. So yeah, so I feel like I think the military life helped with that because it took away a lot of my other options that I was
Mhm.
seeing my friends do. I mean, my college friends were business school and, lawyers and doctors, and then my graduate school friends were a lot of them were doing like these fellowships. A lot of people after they graduate like applied all over the world to do these fellowships and they do that and maybe get university jobs and that wasn't really something I could do. Eventually, I did teach part-time at Old Dominion University in Norfolk, so I taught creative writing there. But yeah, I mean, I think the moves were like a big part of that. Um, yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, we hear so much. I mean, you're going to be like, yeah, I know. But we hear so much that the career is such a hard part for military spouses because of that in unpredictability of where you're going to be, when you're going to be there, what transfers, what doesn't, so much is a factor. So that definitely, I can see writing being a career you can take anywhere with you, which I'm sure helped a little. But okay, so it sounds like so this book, Homefront, that's more recently published, as well as your poetry book, were both focused on the military community. Yes, it's your life, so I feel like I may know the answer to this question, but kind of what made you want to focus your writing on military life in this community?
So Homefront, it's a collection of 14 short stories, and I wrote them over a period of probably 10 years. So when wrote the first ones, I was in my first marriage and I was in like the Navy life. And then, all the way through where I am now as a, veteran spouse, Marine spouse. So I feel like they were kind of just something that was always in the background until I finally had this full collection, which was pretty recently. So they take place all over the world and all different scenarios, and the inspiration just came from so many different places. So I think it kind of reflects in a good way all of the changes that a person goes through over 10 years, but also especially like a person involved in the military. I feel like there's a lot of change at a faster pace.
Oh my gosh, of course. Yeah. And that's really cool to that you wrote them across a big time point and different pieces of your story and your journey were impacting you. Um I saw in the author's note of Homefront, you mentioned that the stories highlight themes of loneliness, identity, guilt, and love that you yourself grappled with during your time as a military spouse. So that really resonated with me. I was like, yes, those are the things like our community is coming to us, like saying they are also grappling with. And I know that people could relate to. So I'm curious if you're able or willing to share anything like that maybe you yourself experienced like along those themes that you felt really kind of embedded itself into some of those stories.
I mean, I think loneliness is a big one, and people don't talk about it that much. 'Cause a lot of the time you're not near any family. I mean, I was like 6 hours from my closest family. So, you're already kind of isolated a little bit. Then, you have the community of people where you're living, but a lot of times you're in a more rural place. And so that is the only community you have. I mean, when we were in Meridian, Mississippi, like that was it. Like the the town was the military. So I think you have that layer. And then when you add on the deployments, the detachments, all of that, suddenly like you find yourself spending a lot of time alone. And I mean, before I had kids was when I noticed it the most, and then I had 2 daughters pretty quickly, one after the other, but even then, like, as a mom, it was me and the little kids, and so you're experiencing loneliness in a little bit of a different way. Like, I mean, we would go to
Yeah.
Target, I mean, every day because, like, there wasn't, like, a whole lot to do, and so, yeah, I mean, I think that that is an element, and so while you're lucky to have all of the other spouses and that whole community that's kind of built in already, I think that there's another side to it, which is, like, you're not near family, or friends, like, people I had, gone to college with or anything, like, old friends are probably not in your same community. I mean, it's not like most military are in a big city typically. So I think that was a yeah, that was, I think a pretty strong emotion, and I I think pushed through that, by writing partly, and then just by pushing myself to do things that I would never have otherwise done. So, like, I ran a half marathon and, like, things that I probably wouldn't have done otherwise. Like I took an art class. I mean, I'm terrible at art, but I was like, this will be fun. And like things that and now like I'm not able to do. So I'm grateful that I was had that time like with myself to do all of that. So but yeah, so that I think shows up a lot in the book. And yeah, I mean, I'd say that's one of the core emotions. And then too, like, the end of a marriage too, it's also a time of really deep loneliness, and some of the characters in the book are going through the end of a marriage in some way, and so, that's, like, a whole different side of the coin too.
Yeah. So it's fiction, but obviously you're writing about an
Mhm.
experiences like that you're talking about that you lived and, are personal to you. So I can imagine writing about something even in a fictional sense can be an emotional process. I'm just curious, especially thinking through like the organization you work with and some of these like healing arts programs where it's the whole purpose is to use this as a tool. I'm curious what your experience was like in, I don't know, what I don't want to put words in your mouth, but whether it was a healing process or an emotional process to write about things even fictionally that you had experienced and what that was like for you and what that maybe did for you.
Yeah, I think okay, so the real quote unquote real parts of the book is the places, like the locations and the settings, were all inspired by real places that I'd been. And then I think the emotions is the other real part. The scenarios are the fictional part, because my life is not as exciting or interesting as the scenarios that I made up. Um, so so that was fictional, and I think there was something great about combining those 2, like the real and the fiction, because I was able to explore some of the emotions in a healthy, kind of non-pressured way where I wasn't worried about, you know, being having to be real and honest as much maybe, and then getting to bring in kind of the fun parts of making something up and using your imagination, and, like, I think there's something really powerful about that. I mean, it doesn't always have to be a memoir. Um, I think a lot of, military people use memoir to process, these things, but, I mean, from the Armed Services Arts Partnership, like, most of that is using other genres. So, memoir is part of it, but I mean, comedy is a huge part of what they do. And that's like taking something real and making it fun in some way. It doesn't always have to be really heavy. So, yeah, so I think that creativity in general, it doesn't always have to just be writing, can be really helpful. Um, but for me, I mean, writing, I'm not a comic, so writing writing is the big one for me. Um, but yeah, I mean, I've seen like people use art in really beautiful ways. The Military Spouse Fine Artists Network was started by a friend of mine years ago when we were both we were both in Virginia Beach, and that's still going strong. And she interviews tons of artists of every genre. So she'll interview writers, a lot of visual artists, so painters, photographers, like jewelry artists. So that's another great place to find creativity and inspiration for an outlet if for people who are trying to figure out what they can do besides just like writing a story. I think there's so many other things.
No, I'm glad you brought up that organization and spoke a little bit more to the organization you work with because I think that is important to know, right? That there are lots of different things to tap into, and I really appreciated what you said about kind of the benefit for you at least of blending fiction and real life, and that I hadn't thought about it that way. That's like, yeah, I can sit here and write about my life and that might do something for me, but to be able to bring in that creative piece and I don't know, maybe what I heard when or what I was thinking about when you were talking about it was like maybe I could retell my story, in a
Yeah.
fictional way, and maybe something would be healing about that. Um, But I think that's really cool. And it's good to know there are other organizations out there. Like we have some here locally that do arts, like visual arts, with our veterans and families. And I don't know, have you seen, like, working with that organization, have you seen how that's been able to impact some of the people, whether they're doing comedy or writing, whether they're veterans or spouses?
I I've seen a lot of wonderful outcomes with that. I mean, I've attended, some of the comedy shows, which are amazing and, like, completely, like, professional, like, you would not know unless you, knew ahead of time that you were seeing a lot of these people who are up there for the first time. I mean, they're
Wow.
really funny, and they rent out, like, comedy clubs in DC and do events there. And then another thing that, I think they put it on pause in the past couple years, but, they also were
Mhm.
doing a annual anthology, so, people who had taken classes could get their work published in this book,
Yeah.
and I was the editor of that, for several years, and I think that was really powerful too for people to get to see their work kind of
Mhm.
published in a real way. So, yeah, I think the experience of it, but then also the experience of, like, bringing it out in that way, whether it's on stage or in a book or something, was really cool for a lot of people. Everyone when I taught the classes, I think almost everyone, that was their first time writing. So, they were really nervous and they were like, "Who am I to, try and do this?" And then by the end, you're like, "Oh, okay, like maybe I can do this." So, that was really cool.
That is really cool. And when you were talking, the sharing, right? The knowing that your story is
Yeah.
being shared, like whether it's in that anthology or a performance or what have you, is yeah, like a second piece of something that could have meaning for you. I know I had I think by the time this episode drops, it'll be 2 episodes ago. I had my husband join me for a podcast to talk about his experience with moral injury. And he said that the experience of having the conversation was very powerful, but also
Oh,
knowing
wow.
that other people were going to hear it, that it was going to be shared, and that perhaps they were going to benefit from it was like another level of healing. So in these sorts of things where your work is being shared, yeah, it's kind of like your personal experience and then knowing the engagement or meaning that it might have for somebody else. Um,
Yeah.
but something I was thinking of, or something we have started doing more groups because our network has been interested in it, is around journaling. So like, I'm not necessarily trying to publish anything or what have you, but I'm curious because journaling, writing is a form of writing, and we have a instructor who does some really cool prompts and stuff. She's done some with us that really actually made me think in some new ways. Um, but I'm curious, do you write every day? I know my mom tries to write every day. Do you have kind of a practice for how you get stuff out there, get the creative juices flowing, or just for your own personal processing?
So journaling, I love the idea of journaling so much, and I have never been able to do it consistently. I love, like, beautiful notebooks and, like, that whole thing, um, but I just cannot, for some reason, get myself to do it, and I think one of the reasons is because I'm so comfortable now on a computer that
Mhm.
I can type really fast thanks to my 6th grade typing teacher,
Yeah.
and I can type as fast as I think, which is really great, and then when I handwrite, because I do it almost never, it's so much slower, so I find that frustrating, but I don't like the idea of journaling on a computer because I
Mhm.
like the paper, so I think that's a amazing thing that one day I will try and do. um I don't write every day for, like, my creative writing, so I when I moved to DC, I, got a job in a PR communications agency, and I've been there for several years, so I technically have this day job and I write all the time for
Mm,
that. And so I'm writing for clients and so I write every single day for hours a day, but not necessarily for my own writing, which is a little disappointing. But I think that in an ideal world, I would write a couple hours every day for myself, because I think it takes at least like 45 minutes to get into like the space and the zone of doing it. And so it's hard to kind of just like, oh, I have 15 minutes, let me, do something. For me at least, like I think I find that really hard. So, um yeah, so I think I'm really inconsistent with it, um but I think like being consistent is beneficial, like one day when I'll get to do that.
yeah, one day when life
Yeah.
allows. If life allows, yeah. Okay, so turning more to your new book, Homefront, I'm curious. So it's a collection of stories, as you mentioned. And I wanted you to have the opportunity to, if you wanted to highlight one or share a favorite or anything that kind of stands out to you that you think might, I mean, I'm sure it all probably is going to resonate with our network due to the content, but if anything you wanted to highlight that was meaningful to you from one of the stories.
I think, so the one story that is probably the only one that pretty closely reflects anything that actually happened was, this one. It's the shortest one in the book. It's called The Strangers of Dubai, and that was based on an experience that I had when I went to visit my husband at the time was on, I think that was his 2nd deployment, and the port call was Dubai. So, I flew over there and I'd never been there and it was so incredible. It was just so different from anything I imagined. And it was the middle of summer and so it was like 100 degrees. So thanks to that, all of the hotels were pretty cheap because no one wanted to go there. So we were able on a military, budget to stay at the Ritz-Carlton, which was like we would not have been able to do that, I think, on the in the on season. But and so we were like in this luxurious place and we went out to the old town, the old part of the city to go to, shopping in the bazaar and there were, that was just like a completely different world. So it was like going from the touristy opulence to like real, like more real Dubai. And that was where a lot of the immigrants, they'd have a huge immigrant population, and a lot of the workers there are not native to Dubai. And so we were looking at pashminas, and I found some that I really wanted to bring back as souvenirs. And my husband noticed their that they were speaking to each other, and they were Afghani. So so I think he got kind of uncomfortable, and then he kind of said something to me, and it was just this moment of like coming face to face with your reality in like a completely different way. So I mean, he like 2 days before he was like flying over Afghanistan, like fighting against the Taliban, and like they were the enemy, and then now you're in this like bazaar, and there's people you have no idea like what their situation is or why they were there, whose side were they on. And I just think that, and we were obviously I mean, you could tell military from the haircuts and all of that. So I think that was a little bit of a um just kind of like a moment of, I don't know, contemplation for me a little bit. And then he um he needed to go to an ATM, and so they took him like kind of down this alley to an ATM. And when he came back, like he told me that they had kind of like, it was kind of in this alley, no one else was there, and he was kind of getting his money out, and he felt them like getting closer to him, and he thought maybe like that there was some kind of dangerous situation, but he turned around and it turns out there was like a group of men who were kind of watching him, and they were actually protecting him from being robbed. And so that kind of made its way into the story, and I just think that was an amazing moment of, you never know someone's story, and the idea of good and bad is so dependent on the context, and, so, you don't typically get a chance, like, in real life to meet people from a lot of those countries where the military is fighting. And I mean, in recent years, there's been a lot of thankfully immigration, and they've been allowing more people in, but that was years ago when it was not that common. So that was one of my favorite stories for that reason. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, I'll always remember that, and it was just like a life lesson, never to judge someone. Um, yeah.
That's really cool. I love that sentiment. I'm a social worker by trade, so I'm like, yeah, you never know what somebody else's experience is, and context is so important, but it's so easy to get, in our own perceptions about what's going on. And so I think that I'm like very excited to read that story because it's this very universal experience that's happening almost kind of in this, like, I don't know, not fairy tale world because it's very real, but like the kind of juxtaposition that you described of like out of body experience almost of here we are in Dubai in this situation, and being confronted with things that really you can be confronted with anywhere, but I imagine that paints a really cool picture in the story, so I'm excited to read it.
Yeah, and I feel like life comes full circle a little bit. I mean,
Yeah.
years later, this was, like, maybe a couple years ago, I had the chance to, um, meet a woman from Afghanistan who had been a translator, and she had gotten, a visa to the US, um, and she came by herself. Like, she was this young woman, and she, um like, left her whole family, and it was just, like, I mean, sometimes when you meet these people, you're like, "They're amazing," I don't think I could do that. I mean, it was pretty remarkable, and, I mean, thanks to, the outreach of a lot of people, she was able to get a job and do all these things and find a place to live and all that, but, um like, in her mind, she was the luckiest person in the world, and then, you're meeting her and you're like, "Oh my god, you've had the hardest life," you know? I mean, this is, like, a hard situation, and she saw it really differently, so, yeah, and so I just think sometimes life comes back on itself like that, in that way.
Yeah, yeah, that's very cool. Yeah, we have a lot, I guess they call them special immigrant visas, special SIVs, yeah, in the Houston area, and they're standing up some really cool programs for them to support the families that are coming over that mostly were
Ah,
translators and stuff like that. So it's cool to see some support, coming back essentially to this community.
yeah,
Very cool.
yeah, I feel like, yeah, Texas and DC, I feel like get a lot of, um, special immigrant visa, recipients, yeah.
It's cool to see them making their own communities, and like you said, yeah, like thinking like, oh my gosh, this is so amazing, like we're so lucky, and yeah, we're sitting there like, oh my gosh,
Mhm.
like this must have been so hard,
Yeah. Yeah.
which both can be true, I suppose.
Right, yeah, exactly.
Well, very cool. I hope our listeners, I almost said readers, our listeners are excited to become readers, and check out your stories because I think a lot will resonate. The emotions that you're pulling in, the experiences that you're pulling in, I know will mean a lot to this community. So I'm excited to be able to have you on and share the work that you're doing with our network. But I always like to kind of leave or end these sessions by asking our guests if there's really kind of just one piece of advice or wisdom or anything you'd like to leave our listeners with.
Um, well, let's see, I have 2. I think, the first one related to the book is, just to let people know that a portion of my royalties are gonna go to the Armed Services Arts Partnership, so that's kind of one way to support them, which in their work, which I think is, so awesome what they're doing. And then I think for people who are interested in writing or like the arts in general, having been involved in it in so many ways for like 20 years, I think the biggest advice I have is um, don't be too hard on yourself.
Mm.
There is so much rejection in that industry. It's sometimes really hard to deal with. Even if you're not trying to be a professional at it, I think the fear of rejection or the fear of not being received well or like people laughing at you or not liking what you do is really real. And I think that's the biggest thing that trips people up when they're trying to get started in something like that. So I think it's just kind of comforting to know that everyone faces that. And even 20 years later, it's still there. And so you might as well just like push through it and try because there's no one out there that I have ever met, and I've met a lot of people in like the writing industry who is completely comfortable in like their work and their success. So,
A good human
yeah,
lesson
and so
too.
yeah,
Anything we do.
in anything, right, exactly. Like there's never a point when you're like, "I'm amazing."
Yeah.
Like
And everyone's like, yes, you're
everyone's gonna
amazing.
love this. Yeah, exactly. Like there's never a point where you feel like that. I mean, um, you can be proud of yourself, but you're always like, "What if this one is no good?" So yeah, so I think like the self-judgment piece, is real, but it's nice to know that like everybody has it, so.
Yes, so push through it. Like do it
Yeah.
for you. Because there's like a video, I think we have it in our curriculum. It's actually like on a different topic about compassion fatigue, but she's like her recommendation is go and live that dream because no one's gonna do it for you and nobody will really care if you don't.
Yeah.
Like do it for you and like try and not let other people thoughts bother you about it, which again is good just
Right,
life advice. But
exactly.
well, thank you so much, Victoria. I'm really excited that we got to talk about this topic. And I'm really excited to get to share your work with everybody. And I hope people go and check it out. I know I've seen it available on Amazon. Is there other places you recommend people going to check it out? Check out your work?
Yeah, it's I mean, it's everywhere you can buy books. So Amazon's a great place. It's on barnesandnoble.com, bookshop.org. I love bookshop.org because they support independent bookstores. So that is another wonderful place. Also, you can go directly to the University of Nevada Press website. That's my publisher. And they're running a discount for uh podcast listeners right now. So it's 20% off. And if you use the code MCS 2024. So that's another option. Yeah.
Amazing. Okay, I'll make sure that's pushed out as well. But thank you so much. I'm really excited to have you on, and I hope everyone got excited to go check out Victoria's book, and I hope something resonated with you. And I'm guessing something from the book will resonate with you too, especially after getting to know a little bit more about it. And we appreciate you listening today, and we will catch you next month. But thank you, Victoria, for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Thanks again for joining us on the Veteran Spouse Network podcast, brought to you in collaboration with Coming Home Well. We thank you for listening today and hope today's session left you feeling a little more connected or gave you some insight into the experiences of our military and veteran families. Don't forget to check us out at veteranspousenetwork.org to learn more about how our military and veteran families can receive the support they deserve.